It was just after 6:30, Saturday evening, the 2nd of November 1940, and half an hour before the shutters came down at the local newsagents. Noticing the time, James Hagan asked his daughter if she would pop out for some cigarette papers and his evening paper. With 2 shillings in her hand, Mary Angela Hagan left her home at 15 Brookside Avenue in the Waterloo district of Liverpool in the northwest of England and set out for the shop on nearby Sandy Lane. Having won a scholarship to the local Seafield Convent School at the age of 10, 15-year-old Mary was a bright, sensible, well-behaved young lady, mature for her age, and although the wartime blacked-out streets were already shrouded in a thick winter darkness, James Hagan barely gave a second thought about asking her to run the short errand. The route to the shop would take her up Brookside Avenue to the junction with Brooklands Avenue. She would then turn right onto Brookvale, cross the railway line and merge onto Sandy Road. The walk to the shop was just a matter of minutes away, and when she hadn't returned by 7:10, her father became a little concerned she may have got lost in the blackout. By 7:30, and with still no sign of Mary, he retraced her steps, calling for her. 2 hours later, with still no sighting of Mary, and after calling at all her friends' and neighbours' houses, Mary's worried parents contacted the local police. Constable Isaac Dixon was sent to the house, and it was decided to form a number of search parties. Friends and neighbours offered to help and split into pairs or small groups, with each taking a specific area. Describing his daughter for those who didn't know her, James Hagan said she was rather tall and well built for her age and wearing a brown coat with fur-trimmed collar and brown shoes. As the group split up to look for her, one of the search party, led by neighbour Richard Brown and Sid Williams, the local ARP warden, took the area at the end of Brookvale, where Mary would have passed on her way to the shop. Just before Brookvale merged with Sandy Road, it crossed the main Liverpool-Waterloo to Lime Street railway line. With Liverpool being a strategic port, it was deemed a high-risk area, and on the bridge a concrete blockhouse had been built, to be used by the Home Guard as an anti-invasion fortress and to help deter sabotage. The search party approached the concrete blockhouse. In the almost total darkness, they shone their torches into the dank, soot-stained building. Spying something bulky on the ground, the warden waded through an ankle-deep, stagnant puddle of water, the remnants of a recent downpour, and shining the light towards a far corner, he picked out a figure lying on a mound of earth. He had found Mary Hagan. Marks on and around her neck seemed to suggest she had been strangled. She had bruises on her face and her clothing was torn and dishevelled, and it was clear she had been sexually assaulted. On the floor beside her was a copy of the Echo newspaper her father had sent out to get, but there was no sign of the cigarette papers or any change. Detective Chief Superintendent Peter Gregson, head of Lancashire CID based in Preston, took charge of the investigation, and under electric arc lights he and his officers searched for clues. The blockhouse floor was mostly covered in muddy water, with dead leaves blown in from the nearby fields. Sweet wrappers, cigarette butts and spent matches floated in a large pool of water which was cleared with a stirrup pump. Beside the body was a clear impression of a shoe or boot heel, and a cast was made. Unfortunately, the discovery of Mary's body had caused dozens of searchers to converge on the blockhouse, and as a result, any other footprints the killer may have left in his wake, entering or exiting the hut, had been obliterated. On the following morning, a post-mortem was carried out at nearby Waterloo Hospital. Home Office pathologist Dr. James Webster found that Mary had been in good health before meeting her violent death. She had a bruise to her face and a cut to her mouth, which suggested had been caused by the killer trying to silence her from shouting or screaming. He also confirmed she had been a virgin before she had been raped and strangled. Webster estimated her time of death as approximately 7:30 p.m. A check into her movements on the Saturday night found that Mary had called at the newsagent on Sandy Lane, but they had sold out of the evening paper, so she went to other shops on nearby Rawson Street and Cambridge Road before she finally managed to obtain a copy and the cigarette papers. The shopkeeper who sold the paper thought the time was just after 7 p.m, as he was preparing to lock up for the night, and she was one of the last customers he served. Amongst the debris removed from the blockhouse was a blood-stained bandage, shaped as if to protect a thumb wound. Dr. James Firth, head of the Home Office Forensic Science Laboratory at Preston, called in to help with the inquiry, confirmed that the bandage found was part of a field dressing as issued to service personnel such as soldiers. He noted that the fact it had been treated unnecessarily with a zinc ointment suggests that the bandage was not administered by a trained medical orderly. The mention of the field dressing was of particular interest to detectives, as the inquiries had already discovered that a soldier had been seen loitering close to the blockhouse shortly before Mary had made her last journey. Following an appeal made for sightings of Mary or anyone acting suspiciously before 7 p.m. on the previous Saturday, several witnesses reported seeing a soldier in the area around that time. A man told police he had seen a soldier leaning against the fence close to the blockhouse around 6 p.m. on the night of the murder. He said it was too dark to make a positive identification of him, but he was wearing a soldier's battle dress and seemed to be staring down onto the railway lines. With thousands of servicemen based locally, detectives spent many hours interviewing soldiers, but all were able to satisfy police of their innocence. A woman living close to the blockhouse told detectives that a soldier with a cut on his face had approached her as she entered her front door and asked to use her bathroom to clean up. He said that he had been involved in a fight with another soldier, but being alone in the house at the time, she refused him entry and watched from the window as he walked away. She thought she would recognise him again. Detectives thought they had unearthed a good clue when the handkerchief marked G. Rimmer was found amongst the items on the blockhouse floor. Everyone locally named Rimmer was interviewed and inquiries were made further afield. Despite these inquiries, no G. Rimmer from the area, and there were several, could be linked to the handkerchief or the crime, and this line of inquiry soon fizzled out. On Thursday the 7th of November, the funeral of Mary Hagan took place at Ford Cemetery, Bootle. Joining her parents and younger brother John were relatives and neighbours, shocked and distraught at the terrible tragedy that had horrified the close community. Meanwhile, as Mary was laid to rest, the hunt for the brutal murderer who had struck and fled in the blackout continued day and night. As the search for Mary's killer continued, a further appeal for witnesses brought to the attention of Lancashire CID detectives information on an earlier crime that had taken place a mile or so from Waterloo. A month before, on Friday the 4th of October, 19-year-old Anne McVitie, a shorthand typist, was cycling home from work when she had been attacked and robbed by a young soldier as she pedalled along the canal bank at nearby Bootle. As he tore at her clothes, she escaped by jumping into the water and swimming across to the other side. The man then fled with her purse containing her ID card and £2 in cash, and also her raincoat and bicycle. As with Mary's attack, witnesses had reported seeing a soldier near the canal bank shortly before. The descriptions of the soldiers in both cases sounded quite similar. The breakthrough finally came when, on Wednesday the 13th of November, a constable in the Metropolitan Police spotted a soldier loitering in a shop doorway in Streatham Hill, South London. On the lookout for deserters, the officer asked for identification and immediately the soldier fled. As the constable gave chase, the soldier fell into a bomb crater but managed to scramble to his feet and make off down the road. He finally caught up with the man and after a brief scuffle was able to place him under arrest on suspicion of deserting from his unit. The man gave his name as 27-year-old Samuel Morgan and admitted he was currently absent without leave from the Irish Guards. He gave an address in Seaforth, Liverpool, and from items found in his pockets was initially held on suspicion of the attack on Anne McVitie. Detectives in Liverpool were notified of his arrest and officers sent down to London to return him to the northwest for further questioning. Morgan was noted as sporting a recently healed cut on his thumb, and mindful of the bandage found in the blockhouse beside the body of Mary Hagan, he was further questioned in relation to this case. Although he initially claimed no knowledge of the crime, a few days after being placed under arrest, he asked to see Detective Inspector Robert Floyd and in his presence made a statement which seemed to implicate him in the murder. "I have been very worried since being arrested and want to tell you what happened. On Saturday evening, the 2nd of November 1940, I got hold of a girl on Brookvale Bridge and she fell down. I carried her into the blockhouse and laid her on the floor. She had 1 and 6 in her hand and I took it. I then went to the Royal Hotel Seaford where I met my brother Frank and also my brother-in-law Jim. I did not intend to hurt the girl at all." Evidence against Morgan, who lived at 15 Berkeley Drive, Seaforth, soon began to mount. An identity parade was arranged by Superintendent Bill Green. Morgan was asked to line up against 8 other soldiers and was immediately picked out by 3 witnesses who recognised him as a soldier seen near the blockhouse on the night Mary was murdered. Morgan made his first appearance at Liverpool Magistrates Court on Wednesday the 11th of December, where he was remanded in custody. During the brief appearance, the court heard that Morgan had deserted from his unit in September 1940 and had been lying low at his brother and sister-in-law's house in Moynew Road, Waterloo. A search of the house found the remains of a field dressing pack which matched the bandage found beside Mary's body. Morgan's sister admitted she had treated the cut on his thumb a few days before Mary Hagan was murdered and had used a zinc-based antiseptic. A search was also made of Morgan's mother's house, and officers found a piece of field dressing being used as a face cloth in the bathroom. A section had been snipped from the corner, and when checked it was found to match the bandage discovered at the murder scene. The stitching was examined under a microscope, and it was found that this particular piece of bandage had been double stitched as opposed to the standard single stitch. The chance of the bandage found beside the body coming from any other piece of dressing other than the one found in Mrs. Morgan's bathroom were very remote indeed. To back this up, officers collected together scores of field dressing from units throughout the northwest, and not one had the same double stitching. They also managed to track the machine that had manufactured this bandage. Apart from the witnesses who identified Morgan as the soldier near the scene of the crime, the landlord of the Royal Hotel reported seeing Morgan in his bar around 7:45 that night. He had a bloodstain on his cap and was bleeding from a wound to his hand. Another person in the public house claimed that he had helped refasten the bandage earlier in the evening, and when he saw Morgan later that night, the bandage was missing. Morgan's shoes were removed and checked against the plaster cast made from beside the body, and they were a perfect match. On Monday the 10th of February 1941, Samuel Morgan appeared in the dock at Liverpool Assizes before Mr Justice Stable. George Linsky KC led for the prosecution, with his defence handled by Edward Wool KC. The trial was to last for 6 days. The prosecution's case was based on the statement that Morgan had made to Inspector Floyd following his arrest in London, and the evidence of the bandage found beside Mary's body and the matching fabric found at his mother's house. Morgan at first tried to put forward a defence of an alibi. He claimed at the time of the murder he had been drinking in the Royal Hotel at Seaford. He had been seen there by witnesses at around 20 to 8, drinking with his brother Francis and brother-in-law James Shaw. As Mary's death had been timed at around 7:30, the defence claimed it would have been impossible for Morgan to have been the killer. His counsel claimed that the statement Morgan had made, in which he admitted meeting Mary on the bridge and taking her into the blockhouse, had been made under duress and should not have been allowed as evidence. Countering the claims over the timings, the prosecution said it was almost certain that Mary had been attacked after leaving the newsagents and heading home across the bridge. Morgan had either lured her or carried her into the blockhouse where she was attacked and strangled. He then had time to walk from the bridge to the Royal Hotel, as the journey on foot had been timed at less than 15 minutes, even in the blackout. The evidence of the bandage was to prove crucial. The fact it was from a faulty batch, which had been double-stitched rather than single, meant that finding someone else with a piece matching the one found in the blockhouse, other than the remains at Morgan's mother's, was virtually impossible. Added to the witness identification and the alleged confession, it was no surprise that on the 6th day of the trial, the jury took less than 55 minutes to return a guilty verdict. Morgan, dressed in his best uniform, stood smartly to attention as the guilty verdict was announced. His mother screamed and collapsed as a black cap was placed on the judge's wig and sentence to death was passed. An appeal was launched contesting the alleged confession, but after hearing all the evidence, Lord Caldecott, heading the panel of judges, dismissed the appeal, and Morgan was returned to Walton Jail and a new date of execution scheduled. As Morgan counted down the days in the condemned cell, his mother wrote a letter to the Home Secretary, Herbert Morrison, claiming the proceedings were flawed and pleading for the verdict to be overturned. Mrs. Alice Morgan, 14 Gordon Road, Seaforth, Liverpool 21, February 19, 1941. Your Excellency, I am writing on behalf of my son, Guardsman Samuel Morgan, who has been accused of a terrible crime of murder for which it was proved beyond doubt his innocence by the Liverpool analyst and Dr. Firth, and also Dr. Webster. The jury member was sent out of the court while my son, the accused, was giving his evidence. An alleged confession was forced out of my son by torture. Sir, I am begging your clemency on his behalf to give him a fair hearing as a soldier of His Majesty's Guards who has served his country and fought for his country in Palestine and Egypt for nearly 5 years with exemplary character. In Judge Stable's summing up, he said there was ample evidence to prove he was a mile away from the scene of the crime when the crime was committed. The public are horrified with the jurymen's unfair verdict. Sir, I beg you as an obedient subject of His Majesty King George VI to withhold his sentence and give him a trial to clear my son of this crime which is entirely innocent. There was lots of evidence that was not put before the judge or the jurymen. When the defence asked the analyst had he examined the blood-stained raincoat found near the scene of the crime, the analyst replied he had not. When Detective Inspector R.C. Floyd of the Cephas Police was questioned as to the garment, he said it had been misled. Also, the defence asked Detective Inspector Floyd on what evidence he charged the accused with. Inspector Floyd replied he had no evidence whatsoever against him to charge him with the murder. Dear Sir, in your mercy I beg of you to give my son the chance to clear his good name. I beg to remain your willing servant and subject of His Majesty King George VI of Great Britain, Mrs. Alice Morgan. The letter, clearly the work of a mother desperate to save her son from the gallows, contained a number of errors of fact which were highlighted on the letter when it was rejected. A last-minute appeal to have the case heard by the House of Lords was also dismissed by the Attorney General. And, at 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning, the 9th of April 1941, 9 days before what would have been Mary Hagan's 16th birthday, Samuel Morgan was hanged. Veteran hangman Thomas Pierpont carried out the execution, assisted by the recently appointed Herbert Morris, officiating for just the fourth time. Samuel Morgan made no confession, but the strength of the police evidence against him left no one in any doubt that when the trapdoors crashed open beneath his feet on the gallows at Liverpool's Walton Jail, justice had been done for Mary Hagan. My name is Steve Fielding. Thank you for watching and listening to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. If you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with new content. Check out my website stevefielding.com where you can find out more information on my books and order copies of the Hangman's Record trilogy at a special discount price. My latest book, Tales from the Hangman's Record Volume 1, is available on Amazon as a paperback and also a Kindle download. Look out for my podcast channels, Tales from the Hangman's Record, which is now available on all platforms, and also Mostly Murder, which will start broadcasting in the summer. Please use the comments below for your thoughts on this case and for suggestions for further episodes in this series.